You're done.
Yeah.
You're done like toast.
Like dinner.
Oh, sorry. Good afternoon. Welcome to the 47th meeting of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. The meeting is being televised. The Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure met last Thursday and recommended in its fifth report that today's meeting be an hour with the Minister of Democratic Institutions, the Honourable Karina Gold, followed by committee business. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the subcommittee report? Discussions, Mr. Reid.
I would be happy to adopt it as long as we are clear publicly on something that I just clarified with yourself and the clerk privately, which is that this would not have the effect of extinguishing the committee's resolution adopted on November 29th that the minister come in for 2 hours to answer questions regarding mydemocracy.ca and the government's planned agenda for electoral reform.
Mr. Chan.
I'll respond from the government side with respect to that. We would be prepared to provide the minister for a second hour.
That would make me happy. So my understanding would regard this as being the first of the 2 hours.
Correct. That's correct.
That sounds good to me.
Okay. The committee agreed to approve the subcommittee report. Okay. Mr. Gold is accompanied today by two officials from Privy Council Office, Ian McCowan, Deputy Secretary to Cabinet under Governance, and Natasha Kim, Director of Democratic Reform, and the Parliamentary Secretary, Andy Filmer. I'll now turn the floor over. Oh, Mr. Chan.
Colleagues, did we want to adopt the subcommittee report, or we want to do that under committee business?
We already did.
We did. Okay. I wanted to also raise an issue that I've already informally raised with my colleagues, but I wanted to raise it this time. I'm proposing my line of. I would like to take a 7-minute round, colleagues, to ask a series of questions with respect to the minister's mandate letter on cybersecurity. However, I'm proposing that in the Liberal second 7-minute round, that be punted to our final 5-minute round, and that 5-minute round get moved to where the 7-minute round would be. And I would ask that we go into camera for my 7 minutes at the very back end of committee business, at the very back end of the questioning of the minister, to be as minimally disruptive to the process. Would that be acceptable to my colleagues?
Mr. Reid.
Provisionally, I think it is. The obvious question is, I actually don't know what the planned rounds of questions are in a 1-hour spot. What were they?
It's just the regular rounds.
So 5 minutes.
7 minutes for the first 4. The second round is 5 minutes for 4, and then a 3-minute.
Yeah. Anyway, do we have any objection to that, Blake? Jimmy? That sounds fine.
Mr. Christopherson.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Chan was kind enough to give me a heads up ahead of time to let me know what was coming. The only thing that I would say that Mr. Chan left out that he'd mentioned to me was that if for any reason at all we believe that this doesn't need to be in camera, that it's not a security question such that it requires staying in camera, that we would get back out right away. And with that proviso and that understanding, to err on the side of caution when it comes to security issues makes all the sense in the world. But if it's not what it appears to be, then it's understood that we will jump back out and we'll be back in public and deal with those issues in the public domain.
Okay.
Agreed.
Okay, agreed. Okay, I'll now turn the floor over to the Minister. Coming, Minister, and you have 10 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Bon après-midi tout le monde. Je suis ravie.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm very pleased to be here with you today.
To appear today. It is an honor to be before the committee this afternoon. I was appointed minister just 4 weeks ago today, and this is my first appearance as a minister before a committee of the House, so I'm delighted that it's with all of you today. I would like to introduce my Parliamentary Secretary, Andy Filmer, Member of Parliament for Halifax, and my Deputy Minister, Ian McCowan, and who's the Deputy Secretary of Governance of the Privy Council Office. Also joining us are Alan Sutherland, Assistant Secretary of the Cabinet, and Natasha Kim, Director, Democratic Reform. I am pleased to be here before the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs with its valuable knowledge and insights on many of the electoral matters mandated to me by the Prime Minister. I have a deep respect for committees and the important role they play in our Parliament. I'm eager to engage, consult, and work with the committee to improve Canada's democracy. The studies you conduct and the years of experience you bring to the table are a few of the many reasons I will particularly value working with all members of this committee and hearing your contributions to these files. I would like to focus my remarks today on my new mandate letter, as well as Bill C-33, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act. If it pleases the House to adopt the bill at second reading, I would of course look forward to returning to this committee to discuss it in more detail. Turning now to my mandate letter. As you know, my overarching goal as Minister of Democratic Institutions is to strengthen the openness and fairness of Canada's public institutions. I have been mandated to lead on improving our democratic institutions and to restore Canadians' trust and participation in our democratic processes. On m'a chargé d'améliorer nos institutions démocratiques, de rétablir.
I was tasked with improving our democratic institutions and reinstating Canadians' confidence in the democratic process and increase the participation of Canadians in these processes.
Start on the topic of electoral reform, a topic on which I know there are strongly held views. Much has been said about this already. Our government consulted broadly with Canadians on electoral reform over the past year. Any proposed change to the foundational values on how we elect our representatives should have the broad support of Canadians. More importantly, Canadians would expect to be consulted before embarking on a change of this magnitude. Public consultations came in many forms. In reaching out to Canadians, there was tremendous work done by the Special Committee on Electoral Reform, several of the members are here today, by members of Parliament representing all parties in the House, the cross-country ministerial tour, and through the government's engagement of over 360,000 individuals in Canada through mydemocracy.ca. In fact, the consultations launched on electoral reform make it one of the largest and farthest-reaching consultations ever undertaken by the Government of Canada. This conversation was at times spirited, and it was a conversation where many had legitimate and passionate views. I respect and thank each and every Canadian who participated in these discussions on something as fundamental as how we choose to govern ourselves. I appreciate the diversity of views. It was our responsibility to listen to what Canadians have said in these consultations and to take that into account. Les consultations ne nous ont pas permis de dégager.
The consultations did not allow us to see that there was a net preference regarding a new electoral system or to reach a consensus. Since there was no preference for change and there was even less regarding a new solution, a referendum could simply make things worse and would not serve the interests of Canada.
It's not within the mandate the Prime Minister has given me. We listened to Canadians and made a difficult decision, but I am confident it was the responsible one. The first-past-the-post system may not be perfect. No electoral system is. But it has served this country for 150 years and advances a number of democratic values Canadians hold dear, such as strong local representation, stability, and accountability. My job is to strengthen and protect our democratic institutions, and we remain committed to improving this country's electoral system in many ways, which I will turn to now. There is much useful work to be done to improve Canada's democracy, and I look forward to working with the committee on this important responsibility. First, I would like to highlight new items in my mandate letter to strengthen and protect the integrity of the democratic process. As we have seen globally, there is increased concern that Canada's electoral process could be susceptible to cyber attacks, in a bid to destabilize Canada's democratic governance or influence the outcome of an election. We must guard against this. In ensuring the integrity of our democratic institutions, I have been mandated, in collaboration with the Minister of National Defence and the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, to lead the Government of Canada's efforts to defend the Canadian electoral process from cyber threats. This will include working with the Communications Security Establishment to analyze risks to Canada's political and electoral activities and to release this assessment publicly. As well, I intend to ask CSE to offer advice and information to Canada's political parties on best practices they may wish to consider when it comes to cybersecurity. As I have previously stated, this is about assisting parties to protect themselves. Ensuring the safety of our democratic system is a non-partisan issue. It is vital that we protect Canada's democratic infrastructure from cyber threats. I hope that you will agree that we must protect our democracy from emerging threats. I have also been mandated to introduce legislation to examine and tighten the rules surrounding fundraisers attended by the Prime Minister, ministers, party leaders, and leadership contestants. À l'échelle fédérale, le Canada dispose des règles de financement des partis politiques.
Federally, Canada has among the strongest and most stringent political financing rules in the world. Nonetheless, it is essential that Canadians continue to have confidence in our political finance and fundraising laws, and we must seek ways to ensure such confidence in the strength of our system is regularly reinforced.
To fundraising activities. We believe Canadians have a right to know, even more than they do now, about political fundraising. We will take action to ensure fundraisers are conducted in publicly available spaces, advertised in advance, and reported on in a timely manner after the fact. These changes will increase openness and help ensure that Canadians have continued trust in their political financing regime and in their political system generally. And I look forward to discussing with other parties any additional ways we can enhance transparency in the fundraising system. This is an area where all parties have an interest and experience to bring to bear. I will also work on recommending options to create an independent commissioner to organize political party leaders' debates, reviewing the limits on the amounts political parties and third parties can spend during and between elections, proposing measures to ensure that spending between elections is subject to reasonable limits, as well as supporting the President of the Treasury Board and the Minister of Justice in reviewing the Access to Information Act. I am confident you share a desire to work on these important matters with our government. In addition, I am the lead minister in relation to Senate reform, including the government's nonpartisan, merit-based Senate appointments process to fill Senate vacancies. I am also responsible for working to pass amendments to the Canada Elections Act to make the Commissioner of Canada Elections more independent from government and to work to repeal the elements of the Fair Elections Act which makes it harder for Canadians to vote. In terms of this final point, as you know, the government has already introduced Bill C-33, which proposes 7 measures in this regard. This bill is designed to increase voter participation by breaking down barriers to voting while enhancing the efficiency and integrity of Canada's elections. These elements are at the heart of our electoral system, and I am pleased with the legislation that has been put forth. Should the House refer C-33 to committee after second reading, I would look forward to working with the committee in its study of this legislation. While not a specific item in my mandate letter, as I noted earlier, it is my overarching mandate to strengthen and protect our democratic institutions. That includes continually working to improve the Canada Elections Act and the administration of elections. I am very pleased that this committee is charged with the same goal, particularly in relation to your current study into the Chief Electoral Officer's recommendations report following the 42nd general election. I know this committee has been working quite diligently on this report, which includes 132 detailed recommendations to further modernize and strengthen the integrity and accessibility of our electoral system. Your work will help inform the government in the next steps of modernizing our electoral system. I welcome your insights into these matters and improving the Canada Elections Act with you. I am eager to begin with the hard work necessary to achieve these mandate commitments given to me by the Prime Minister. La démocratie du Canada fait l'envie du monde, mais il ne faut pas se reposer sur...
Canada's democracy remains the envy of the world, but we should never become complacent. Our system is trusted by Canadians and renowned worldwide because we are constantly working to improve it.
Contributions on Bill C-33, on your contributions and expertise on this recommendations from the CEO of Elections Canada, and as I continue to work to fulfill the mandate set before me. Thank you again for inviting me here today. I look forward to working on my mandate. I look forward to working with all of you, and I would be happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Minister. We'll start our first round of 7 minutes. Questioner with Ms. Sahoda.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister Gould, for being here today, and congratulations on this new role that you have. You spoke a little bit about your mandate to work with the Defense Minister and the Minister on Public Safety regarding cyber attacks to our electoral system. What are some of your main worries and what areas will you be focusing on? Why do you think this is an important part of your mandate? I also want to highlight a little bit of what we heard today at a youth delegation that we were both at. I thought that was quite interesting. There was a youth that came up. It was a Canadian Universities event that spoke a little bit about algorithms and what news that is fed to us online. I think that's been a concern. It's been brought up in a lot of other committees that I sit on, that it influences the way we think when we're targeted by websites to be presented news or fake news that we've been hearing a lot about. So what are some of your thoughts on, on this and how it relates to your mandate?
Thank you very much for the question, and I think it's a very important and timely question to be asking. It's been 4 weeks now, so I haven't had the opportunity at this point to sit down with CSE. We've had some preliminary discussions, but that's something that will be coming in the near term in terms of what this looks like and what the breadth of the mandate will look like. In my mandate letter, it's talked specifically about political parties and ensuring that the communications and security establishment is analyzing, monitoring, and reviewing what potential threats to political parties' information systems could be, and then providing information as to how they can protect themselves. It's really important, I think, that we do this right and that Canadians have the confidence that this is not about the CSE going in and looking at political parties' information systems, but rather about them providing an overview about best practices on how they can protect themselves and identify potential emerging threats. The conversation that you raised this morning was from a young man who works in artificial intelligence who was talking about the fact of how news sources in many ways, in some respects, can be targeted to individuals based on their preferences, and the silo effect of how we consume media and information as citizens. And his concerns were about how we ensure that we get a diversity of views that are reaching many individuals. I think that this is definitely an area that we need to be considering and looking at. It's something that I'm definitely concerned about, but it's a question of how we as a government and we as parliamentarians and we as political leaders engage with this, because I think in Canada we have one of the highest per capita uses of Facebook, and we know that Facebook and other social media will push information to you based on your own preferences, and so how do we ensure that people are getting a diversity of viewpoints to make informed choices, but also have the digital literacy to be able to look at these and understand where they're coming from and make those informed choices. I think it's a really important conversation to be having. It's something to start thinking about. I think as political leaders, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're doing what we can to ensure people have that access to diverse points of views and different sources of information. And I think it's a really important thing. It will be about us determining, what is the breadth of democratic institutions in Canada, and does that include the media? And then how do we work in partnership with the media for them to have access to those tools as well. But that's something that I think will come in time. But of course, I welcome points of view and ideas or thoughts from either this committee or other members of Parliament on that.
No, thank you. It was definitely a big concern for him and also the youth sitting at my table. I'm going to share my time with Mr. Graham, if there is any.
How much time do you have left?
2.5 minutes.
Okay.
Oh, it's more than I thought. Okay. I wanted to get into process a little bit. Now, you're aware that the Procedure and House Affairs Committee has been studying the Chief Elections Officer's report for some time now, and I think if we look at how much is left, we have a good 20 or 30 meetings left on it, possibly more. There's an awful lot to do. It is in camera, I can't get into the details with you, but I know that it's within your mandate and your job to bring in more legislation on electoral reform and democratic reform on changes in general. So I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of timelines, if you have any idea when you're expected to do stuff, and would it be helpful for us to get our reports to you, or if you want us to get interim reports out. Do you have comments on that?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I appreciate that the committee is currently reviewing the recommendations from the CEO of Elections Canada following the past election, and I appreciate that there are 132 recommendations, so that this is quite a big task nonetheless. And I really look forward to receiving your input on those in terms of the direction as we move forward. Of course, we have an election in 3 years, so we don't want to push it too long because we want to make sure that those recommendations can get in ahead of time and with enough time for the Elections Canada to implement those. If there's a possibility for interim reports, which I believed I had read the chair had maybe commented about in the Hill Times, I would welcome that. The depth and the breadth of the study that you're undertaking is very valuable. So I hope that I can count on you to get those to the public and to me in a timely fashion, and that we can get to work on implementing legislation that will be in effect for the next election, because I know for many members of this committee that's very important that we make sure we get this done so that ahead of 2019 we don't face some of the issues that we faced in 2015.
Fair enough.
20 seconds.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Minister, thank you for being here. Thank you as well to your very competent staff and to your parliamentary secretary. Good to see you here as well. Thank you as well for making time to meet with me Tuesday of last week. I wanted to ask you a number of questions, and I submitted you a letter yesterday to assist you, recognizing that some of these things are matters on which you might not be prepared if you didn't have a little bit of advance time to work on them. I apologize as well for the fact that they came to you with only 24 hours notice, but we only learned you'd be here Friday afternoon after, well, not quite after work hours, but after I had departed at any rate. I had a series of 5 questions I wanted to ask you, but I think I might just read from the list and then ask you. I'm going to start, if you don't mind, with the third of the questions I had, which is this. These all relate, of course, to the mydemocracy.ca survey or instrument. And the third question on that list was, has the government retained or has it destroyed the data produced by responses to the field test and the final mydemocracy.ca survey?
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the fact that you sent the questions so that we could be prepared for these. I have brought 2 technical staff here with me today who are prepared to answer on these for you. Thanks.
So, Mr. Reid, I'll start, and Ms. Kim can add in as she sees fit. In terms of the data elements, VoxPop still has the data set. There's 2 data elements that have been generalized. The year of birth and the postal code have been made more general simply because the analysis around those has already been done. But other than those 2 elements, the data set is with VoxPop. And Ms. Kim, I'm not sure if she has anything else to add.
No, other than that the final report has been published on the website.
Okay, so this allows me to move to questions 4 and 5 are really alternatives. The data hasn't been destroyed, so therefore, let me ask, given that it hasn't been destroyed, will you commit to sharing it with Parliament, or if you will, with the general public? Obviously, excluding information that would be connected with specific individuals.
So I think, if I could, Mr. Reid, you've just gone to the heart of the issue. So you'll be aware from the VoxPop survey and also from the VoxPop final report that the government has indicated publicly that they would only be receiving data back in aggregate form. That's something that's been clearly stated. So we just got your request yesterday night. So what I would say to you is that we were going to have to review it, but it's going to be reviewed in the context of what I just said, namely that there's a commitment on the part of the Government of Canada to only get aggregate data back in this exercise, and obviously to ensure that all privacy requirements are met. So what I would say, if it's satisfactory, is we'll take that one away. We just got it last night. But the concern is the one that you yourself have identified.
Right. The fact that the minister is coming back for a second meeting allows us to deal with this further, and we'll pursue it at that time. But let's just leave it there. Turning now to question number 1. The question is, did the government exclude from the final mydemocracy.ca survey any questions that were included in the November 2016 field test for the survey, or that were recommended for inclusion by Vox Pop Labs Academic Advisory Group?
So, Mr. Reid, I am going to need Ms. Kim's help on this, but let me start in terms of just describing the overall response. In terms of why the field test was done, there's a number of objectives. One is about trying to ensure that at the end survey we have a limited number of questions. Obviously, you get higher response rates when that's done. Make sure that usability is high, but also specifically for the purpose of developing the archetypes, the groupings, the clusters that were fed back as part of the response to the survey. So in terms of your question about what was different in terms of the field test versus the final one, I think there's 6 factors that are in play that led to changes between the two. The first is, as I said, is there was an effort made to use the pretest to determine what the best clusters were. So there's some analytic work going on in that regard. Secondly, there was an effort to see how the survey length could be brought to an appropriate size in order to maximize the user experience and user response rates. The third thing would be in terms of trying to avoid unnecessary duplication. There were a number of questions that were in similar kind of space. Fourth, there were a few questions that were removed as they were perceived as being too sensitive, just in terms of trying to ensure that the questionnaire was well received in terms of Canadians writ large. Fifthly, some questions were used to assess basically user satisfaction. Were there issues that were encountered in terms of how users respond to them? And as I think finally there was noted in the media, there were a few questions which were accidentally included in the pretest, and that obviously was not replicated in the final survey. So I don't know if Ms. Kim wants to add to that, but that's a quick summary.
Well, let me just hop in then. Thank you. So the answer then is, that was a double-barreled question I asked. The answer is yes, there were some questions that were in the field test that were not in the final survey. You didn't answer regarding any questions that were recommended for inclusion by the Vox Pop advisory group, and because I'll be out of time before I can ask the next question, I'll just ask it now. Are you willing to share the what those questions were, and moreover, are you willing to share the results of the answers to those questions, the ones that were asked in the field test that were not included in the final survey?
I think there's 3 questions there, so if I don't get them all, Mr. Reid, you can follow up in the next round and make sure I get them covered. So in terms of the results, I guess I give the same answer that I did last time. That's subject to us having a look at what exactly can be provided given the pledges that have been made in terms of the government only getting aggregate data and making sure that the privacy rights are respected. In terms of your question about the development or the design, the questions were developed over a number of weeks. It was something that involved Vox Pop, who've got some expertise in this area, an outside academic panel. There was obviously departmental officials. There were exempt staff involved in those discussions. So just to say it was an iterative process, and it was not something that was sort of done in one moment. But that was basically the nature of the development process. I'm not sure if Ms. Kim has anything she wants to add.
Thank you. Yeah.
To all the participants, thanks. Much appreciated.
Mr. Christofferson.
Very good. Thank you, Chair. And Minister, thank you very much for coming. And I've privately congratulated you. Let me publicly congratulate you on your ascension to Cabinet. And while I have a moment, may I also just give my public congratulations, in addition to my private, to my colleague Philomena Tassi, who has also been appointed Deputy Whip of the Official Opposition. And I wish both of you well. I know you'll do a great job. So, sorry. Well, I guess I'm thinking ahead. My apologies. The government, Deputy Whip to the government. Minister, thank you so much for being here. As you can appreciate, like the last meeting with your predecessor, these really weren't meet and greet, hi, how are you, courtesy meetings. We specifically called you in to deal with a couple of issues that are affecting our work. And I can't go too far because we're limited because it's in-camera work, but I don't think it's any big secret that the work at committee has seized up until we get these issues resolved. And I can't get into specifics, but we need some answers here that allow us to get back to work. So I'm going to be dealing with some rather mundane issues to most people, but critically important to us. You made the statement that you have deep respect for the committees. I've heard this from the government. The Prime Minister has enunciated it during the campaign all the way through and said committees are going to matter and they're going to be respected. And that's the issue. One of the big issues was that we were in the midst, as you rightly alluded to, going through the Chief Electoral report. I think we were doing good work. We had our sleeves rolled up. We were identifying things that we could quickly agree with and then setting aside the harder things that we need to spend time on. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Bill C-33 lands with this thud in the middle of our work. And it left us with a real problem, because if you say you respect the work of the committees, then it would have made sense that you would wait until we had issued at least some reports to give some advice on legislation you might be considering. But the way it was done, there was total disregard for the work we're doing. It left us, me anyway, I speak for myself, feeling, what is this, make work project? I mean, why bother doing all this if the government's going to ignore it and just do what they want? So there's that issue. And then the second, attached somewhat, and I appreciate Mr. Graham raising this, and you did allude to it in part, but I really need something clear, Minister, with respect. And the second part of this is going forward. Going forward, I had actually said, we want an absolute guarantee you aren't going to do that again. It was Mr. Chan and Mr. Graham who raised the arguments about, well, you can appreciate the government can't give that kind of a blanket in case we get bogged down. I understood all that. Again, I think you made some reference to that in your remarks. So what we were looking for was to respect our process, to ensure that find some way that we can communicate so we know what it is you're considering, and ask us if we would turn our attention to that particular area to give you our thinking, to help advise you, and you can choose to take it or not. But to just continue to produce electoral reform bills, and by the way, as you know, getting rid of some of that awful Unfair Elections Act stuff is a priority, but procedures matter and committees matter. So some assurance that the work that we're doing is actually meaningful and that the government is considering it. Otherwise, why would we bother doing that? We'll just go on to other things. So I'm looking for two things, if you will. One is an acknowledgement that the government was wrong. An apology would be nice and not that difficult, because it really was so wrong and disrespectful. And secondly, just a further undertaking that there'll be more dialogue so that we can actually do work that does help inform your decisions, and it's done in a timely way where you're getting it in a timely way. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, David, and I look forward to working with you, and I'm glad we have such strong Bay Area support or
That's Harbour, Minister. Hamilton Harbour, not Burlington Bay.
well, we could discuss that outside of committee. But no, look, I'm here for 4 weeks to the day of being appointed because I do believe in the importance of the committee, and I do believe in the work that you're doing, and I do really respect the work that you're doing. And in terms of communication, Andy Phillimore, my parliamentary secretary, is here. His job is to be engaged with Parliament. And so, whereas I don't have a specific work plan moving forward at this time in terms of when future legislation will come forward, I do want to be in touch with the committee on that to make sure that we understand what the schedule is, what you're working on, and how we can work in concert. Because ultimately, I know you and I are here for the same reason, because we want to make sure that we're doing what's right for Canadians. And so I know that you have a lot of experience and a lot of, good years behind you and a lot of knowledge on this committee. So, and ahead of you.
Lifetime Achievement Award.
And ahead of you, of course. And, to make sure that we're getting, those elements of the Fair Elections Act repealed. And of course, that we're working, and I said it in my comments to David, but I'm going to repeat it right now in terms of the work that you're doing on the CEO report, on the recommendations, is valuable. I think that those are two pieces that can actually work in tandem and in concert, and I will take those very seriously, those recommendations, to see if there are further things that can be done to ensure that we update the Elections Canada Act as best as possible. We're doing what we need for Elections Canada and supporting Canadians' access.
Thanks, Minister. I know I appreciate time, Chair. Thanks. I just quickly, a recognition that C-33 was wrong, please, to allow us to get down to our work. You can't say you respect the committee, the government, and then insult the work of this committee and not have some kind of an apology or a recognition that it was wrong to do that. Please.
I'm a new minister.
Yeah.
I want us to get us started on the right foot. I want us to start working together on this, and so I'm going to say let's start with me, out of a place of respect, and I'm going to do that with you. I'm looking forward to working on this. We have legislation that's before the House. I'm looking forward to it coming to committee, but I do want to allow you some time to make sure that you get the work done that you need on the recommendations, and so that we can work together to make those what we need to do for Canadians. So David, I look forward to working with you on this because I know we can get this done.
You're not making it easy, Minister. Whatever little time I have left, I'd like to give it to my friend, Mr. Cullen. Probably about 30 seconds.
You mentioned starting on the right foot. Your first job as minister was to kill the central promise that your government made on electoral reform. It's like you were hired to run a company that then declared bankruptcy. It seems to me that if you want to beat down cynicism, keeping a promise would really be important. Minister, you said earlier that your government was elected on a false majority. Do you still believe that?
I had said that there were, when talking about electoral reform, that's what some people put forward in terms of why we needed to reform the system. I do want to say that I think it's incumbent upon all of us as parliamentarians, as leaders in our community, to make sure that we are constantly encouraging people to get involved in the democratic process, whether a policy is put forward that we agree with or disagree with. It's extraordinarily important for all of us as leaders, as politicians, to make sure that we continue to engage Canadians on issues that they're passionate about.
So you don't believe it anymore?
Mr. Graham, for 5 minutes. Oh,
Philomena.
sorry? Philomena.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Tassi.
I'd like to begin by thanking my colleague MP Christopherson for his congratulations. I appreciate that. It's very well received. And as everyone else on the committee, Minister, I'd like to congratulate you and thank you for your dedication and hard work. I'd like to read from your mandate letter. It says that you are mandated to bring forward options to create an independent commissioner to organize political party leaders' debates during future federal election campaigns with a mandate to improve Canadians' knowledge of the parties, their leaders, and their policy positions. My question to you is, I would like that you comment on why you believe it's important to establish an independent commissioner in order to organize leaders' debates.
Thank you very much, Philomena, and welcome to the committee. It's our first day together. I look forward to working with you on this as well. When it comes to leaders' debates, I think we saw quite clearly in the last election how depending on the preferences of particular leaders, debates happened or did not happen. The one that comes to mind in particular is the women's debate, which I think was one that was very important and should have gone through regardless if a political leader had decided not to participate, and also setting the number of debates that is required for Canadians to engage with and listen and hear out the ideas and policies that different political parties have through the leaders of each of those parties. So I think that this is important, and this is an important step in terms of regulating and mandate how many debates we have, and then of course it's up to the different political party leaders if they choose to participate in them or not, but they should happen regardless, and I think that's important so that Canadians have some kind of predictability when it comes to debates. They have predictability in terms of understanding and knowing when and how they can hear from leaders of different political parties and gain access to that information.
Okay, thank you. Your mandate letter as well provides that you are to enhance transparency for the public at large and media in the political fundraising system for cabinet members, party leaders, and leadership candidates. Can you explain to us or comment on why the government has decided to enhance the fundraising system, why you believe it's important?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So this is with regards to political fundraising, particularly with those that, specifically with regards to fundraisers attended by cabinet ministers, party leaders, or those aspiring to be leaders. And the fact of the matter is that while we have some very strict rules in Canada with regards to fundraising, we think that it can be more accessible and the information can be more timely with regards to public access to this information. This is something that I look forward to working with the committee on, because at some point legislation will have to be developed, and of course this will probably come before PROC, and so I look forward to your input on this and your ideas in terms of how we can strengthen our political fundraising laws, and particularly this one. So I'll be looking forward to working with you on this.
Okay, thank you. How much time is 2 minutes? Okay, I'll share my time with MP Sims.
Thank you. Well, Minister, like you, I'm new here today at this committee, but I'm certainly not new to this House. As Mr. Christopherson pointed out and Mr. Graham alluded to, I was here during the Unfair/Fair Elections Act, whatever the name it goes by these days. Section 3 of the Charter, every citizen has the right to vote in an election. It's quite clear. During witness testimony at that time a few years ago, time after time, witness after witness, not just here in Canada, but also in Europe, pointed to what the former bill was trying to do, which was to limit that right to vote. In an analysis, it says, there is an onus on the government to prevent this is about Section 3 of the Charter. There is an onus on the government to prevent unreasonable administrative barriers to the exercise of our democratic rights. So it's our responsibility to make sure that these barriers do not exist. The thrust of that last piece of legislation was to put up those barriers to those that they felt that they want to disenfranchise. So, in my limited time, C-33. Can I get your comment on this? And as Minister, how I hope you would not be in favor of putting up any more administrative barriers and to enfranchise the most vulnerable in society to exercise their democratic right in Section 3. Sorry.
Okay, so in 20 seconds, I think that Bill C-33, should it pass second reading and come to committee and be implemented in law, I think it would address many of those issues that you raise, and I think it would be an important step forward to make sure that all Canadians have access to voting, which, as you say, is their right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take that with you. Okay. Mr. Richards. Yeah, Mr. Richards.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Minister, thanks for being here. I'm going to start with a yes or no question. I promise that the remainder of my questions I'll give you more opportunity to expand upon your answer, but I'd like to start with a yes or no. And the question is your government committed to ensuring that there's no foreign influence in our elections?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate your indulgence on the yes or no, just timing-wise. Okay, so what I wanted to do was, obviously in your mandate letter, it indicates, actually the first bullet point, after, of course, it talks about, getting rid of the electoral reform promise, the first bullet of the things that, your intention, the Prime Minister is instructing you to do, indicates that you're supposed to lead the Government of Canada's efforts to defend the Canadian electoral process from cyber threats. And when I think about that, given that our voting system is, we don't have electronic voting, we don't have online voting, and we're, utilizing paper ballots, the good old-fashioned method of voting, unless your government has some intention of, not sort of ignoring another of the recommendations the committee makes and going to an electronic ballot or some kind of online voting, I don't see there being a lot of threat there of some kind of a hack that would hack our election results or something like that. But I do think that there is actually something else, and it is mentioned in your mandate letter and also in the mandate letter of your predecessor, I believe, which talks about the financing. And it talks about looking at political party financing and third-party financing and the limits on it. And one of the things that I think there is a serious concern about is the idea of foreign money influencing elections through third-party spending. And so I wanted to sort of get your sense on that, and whether that is something that your government is in those changes that you've been mandated to make. Will you be looking at dealing with the foreign financing in terms of third-party spending in elections and the influence that it would then have on elections? Is that something that you're committed to doing, and when would we expect to see something in that regard?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, Blake. Thank you for raising it. I want to go back to the beginning of your question, though, about political parties being hacked. I think that actually recent events have demonstrated that this is a very real issue, and it's something that we need to be attuned to and we need to be proactive on. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, the Australian Signals Defense Agency, I think is what they're called, said that they were actually providing...
Sorry, Minister, I do hate to interrupt, but I have a very limited amount of time. There's only about 2 minutes remaining. So could you get maybe just, I understand you probably have something you want to say here, but could you maybe get to the subject of the question I've asked, because I want to make sure we get there. So the question is around
so,
the foreign,
as it
financing.
stands right now, foreign entities cannot give money to political parties or candidates.
But they can to third parties.
So part of my mandate will be to look at spending limits for third parties. I think that's an interesting point you raise, and I'd be interested to hear more on your thoughts on that as we move forward.
Okay. Well, I think that what would be important is that, given that you've indicated your government is committed to ensuring that there's no third sort of foreign influence in our elections. You've indicated that yes, that's something you are committed to as a government. You would have to, of course, ensure you deal with this issue, and it's something that I would encourage you to look at. When the Chief Electoral Officer was before the Senate Committee on Legal and Constitutional Affairs, there was a number of questions asked in this regard. And the Chief Electoral Officer did confirm that there is significant concern there, that they've, third parties that can be foreign funded, in terms of surveys, websites, calling services to do push polls or things like that, communications with electors, all those things can be funded through those third parties through foreign funding. So if you really are committed as a government to ensuring that you're going to make sure that foreign influence isn't a part of our elections, you will have to deal with this. And so I would certainly encourage that that's something you do, and I would encourage you to make sure you do it quickly.
Okay. Do I have time to respond, or is that...
You do, yes.
Oh, okay. No, I appreciate that. I think that's a really interesting point to raise. And because I don't know what your deliberations are because they're in camera, but if this is something that the committee would want to comment on, I would welcome that feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Smale for 5 minutes, and then we'll go to Mr. Chan.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate that, and thank you to the Minister. I had the pleasure of meeting your father at a agricultural event in Nesselton almost a year ago now, but he had told me you were elected at the same time I was, so I was glad to meet him and your father. He seemed like a great guy. I was listening to your conversation about looking into how, you said Facebook and Twitter, how information is sent to people aligned with their political views. I find this, I was taken back by your answer, looking at the way you can almost control information, the government controlling information that people get. I personally, when I heard that, my back went up. That wasn't the line of question I was going to go on, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts about what you plan to do when you say the government is going to ensure that people get more of a wide range of information.
Oh, I think you misheard me because it was more about ensuring the integrity of information. I'm not really sure that it's the government controlling, it's actually not the government controlling information at all. It was more a general comment about the way that our media landscape is at the moment, and I think it's incumbent upon us as community leaders, as politicians, as a government to think about how we ensure that integrity of the media moving forward. But obviously the government can't and will not be controlling that kind of information. And the comment was more with regards to how information is currently consumed by Canadians, by people around the world, and thinking about what kinds of tools we can offer our citizens to provide them with the ability to discern the quality of the information that they're receiving. I think that this is something that is very much at a preliminary stage of deliberation, and something that we're very much just kind of coming to grips with, but I certainly didn't mean it in the way that you suggested.
Okay, I just want to make sure the government is controlling or showing people what information they think they should be reading.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to move on to what you said before about cyber attacks. Like as my colleague Mr. Richard said about you can't really hack paper ballots. So what if you're able to speak to it, what threats do you potentially know about, or what are you looking at to help protect our system, so to speak?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. And I want to be clear that at this point, we don't know of any potential or existing threats that have come to Canadian political parties or the Canadian political system. But we did see, in a recent election of one of our close allies, that there were, attempts to influence the election and to collect information from political parties. As I was starting to comment with regards to your colleague, Mr. Richards, that the Australian Signals and Defence Agency has recently offered the same kind of information and best practices to their political parties because they've experienced some attempts to access the information that political parties have. France has also made similar offers and will be offering a session to their political parties at the end of the month. And we know that some of our other allies have also experienced this. So really, this is a proactive step for the community.
I believe in security. I'm with you on that. I think the issue in the States was the release of emails, so I'm not sure if the people in the DNC were mad because they got caught or because they wrote them. I think it might have been because they got caught. But
but I think that there's a certain, it wouldn't be about the government protecting those systems. It would be about them providing this information to all political parties on how they can best protect the integrity of their systems, because it's not just about emails, but political parties do have information with regards to Canadians, and I think our government believes that it's important that those, are protected. But of course, this would be at the discretion of political parties to take us up on this offer.
Okay, I have one more quick comment. You're saying about the fundraising. I think you're correct. Currently what's going on, the Prime Minister doesn't break the law, but it does break the ethical laws. I would think to make it easier.
I didn't say that.
No, I did.
Yeah.
I did.
But you said I was
to make
correct.
it easier,
I didn't say that.
instead of changing the law or strengthening the law, it would be easier just to ask him to stop doing what he's doing. But I only have a minute left, and if it's okay with the chair, I'd like to give my time to my colleague Elizabeth May.
I'm very grateful, and thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I have really only one question, and it's that I think there's a conflict in your mandate letter, and I know, as one of my colleagues said earlier, this may be above your pay grade to answer it. I don't think it's about pay grade. I know that your mandate letter comes to the Prime Minister. But it's very fundamental to your role as Minister of Democratic Institutions, as you said in your opening, to restore Canadians' trust and to encourage participation. And yet your mandate letter puts you in a position immediately of breaking trust with Canadians by withdrawing the commitment to electoral reform. So my question is not to ask you to sort out that conflict, but to ask whether you are willing to pursue with members of Parliament who want to find potentially a middle ground so that you can, through electoral reform, restore trust of Canadians in the promise the Liberals made.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for your question, and thanks for joining us here today. I look forward to working with you on many different issues, as we have in the past, as we move forward. I think that there are many aspects of my mandate that will continue to enhance trust and respect and democracy that I look forward to working on. I think it's also important that we spent a long time consulting with Canadians. A lot of people in this room spent a lot of time consulting with Canadians. Sorry? Or you're not?
Okay.
Okay,
Sorry.
Time. Consulting with Canadians, and that we heard many different points of view, and many of those were valid, and all of them were valid, of course, because everyone who has their point of view and their perspective on that, and so I think it's important that we listen to Canadians, and I think that it's important that we take this step forward and continue to work with the committee and members of Parliament to do what we can to enhance trust and democracy.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Chen, I understand you don't need to go in camera.
I don't think I need to go in camera. I've listened to the lines of questions from all of my colleagues, and I think I'm on the same subject matter, and I think if we're all confident it's already been on the public record, I think that I'm fine to continue in the open. So thank you, Minister, and I've listened carefully, and my questions all really relate to the first line in your mandate letter as it relates to cybersecurity threats within your mandate letter. And I specifically wanted to follow up on some of your comments that you already made to both my colleague David and my colleague Blake's line of questioning on cybersecurity threats. How will the Communication Security Establishment, as you work with them, along with the Minister of National Defence and the Minister of Public Safety, liaise with political parties? Should we be basically reaching out and providing designated individuals that will be working with you, with these other ministers, and with the CSE. And then I think most important from the perspective of political parties, and I recognize you already answered this question by saying that the intent of your mandate letter is to provide best practices, but any information that might be shared by the political parties with the CSE and with you and the other ministers, how do they have confidence that that information will be compartmentalized and not shared with other political parties?
So thank you for that question, because I think it raises a really important point that this, and I think I said this already, but I'll reiterate it, is that this is not about the government or the CSE going and seeking information from political parties. It's about them providing information to political parties. At no point, at least in this mandate or in this particular item, does the government receive information from political parties? I think that's a really important distinction to be made, because it needs to be, if this is to be successful, and if we are to provide the support and assistance to political parties, then parties and Canadians need to know that this is about providing assistance on how they can protect their information that they have, as opposed to collecting and going in and taking any information. Did you want to add to that?
Just to follow up on that, Minister, so will there be any sort of risk assessment engaged by the CSE?
Yes.
In terms of potential threats as you provide that advice to political parties? And would it extend to all political parties, not just the parties in the House of Commons, but potentially others that are not currently represented? So how far will that mandate go?
Well, I think that's something that needs to be explored. I think as it's worded right now, it's all political parties represented in the House. But that's a conversation to be had with the Communications and Security Establishment. They have not yet done this analysis because it has not been part of their mandate. So that will be a conversation that I'll be having with them to explore how to develop this. But it will be important that they will do kind of a landscape analysis of what existing threats are, emerging threats are, and potential threats are. There will be a public analysis of this, but then there will also be more information that's given specifically to political parties so that they can take that information to use it how they best see fit.
And in terms of any information that's gathered through this particular process, what would the reporting mechanism be back to Parliament? Would it be back to this committee? Would it be through the Public Safety Committee? Or would it be potentially even to the new proposed National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians that is proposed in Bill C-22?
I think that's still to be determined. However, I do believe that it would be very important for this to be reported back to Parliament. I think that if Bill C-22 passes, that committee would certainly be monitoring and have access to this information, because I think anything that deals with security, intelligence, or the CSE, that committee would have purview over. So it would be, but I think it is important just to highlight and to stress that this is the information collected would not be information from political parties. It's about providing political parties information to protect themselves, because we need to make that distinction really clear so that people have confidence in this.
I just want to follow up on what little remaining time I have, about 2 minutes perhaps, with respect to questions that my friends in the official opposition raised with respect to, we basically use a paper ballot process, but in part of the recommendations in the public report from the Chief Elections Officer, Elections Canada is exploring the use of technology as a basis of improving the voting process. And they actually provided a demonstration, in fact, to PROC with respect to some of that new proposed use of technology. Is there anything that we need to look at as a committee as you move forward on your mandate letter that you think might be a potential risk to the integrity of the voting process as Elections Canada begins to explore greater use of technology as a basis of enhancing the voting process?
Yeah, I think that that's a really important question and something for us to consider. If I'm not wrong, I believe the Netherlands this past weekend confirmed that they were actually going back to paper ballots because of potential risks. But we do need to keep in mind and keep in consideration that there are technologies that can help and assist people with disabilities to make it more accessible for them to vote. And so how can PROC look at some of those technologies and ensure their integrity to make sure that there's no possibility for tampering, so that we know that those votes are integral and valid and respect the democratic process. So I would definitely encourage PROC to take all of that into consideration as we move forward. Thank you.
One final quick question. Again, this wasn't clear when I reviewed your mandate letter, Minister, but as you go through the review of cybersecurity threats, is it within your mandate to make recommendations back to, I guess, the President of the Treasury Board for additional resources should there be an assessment of potential risk of the integrity of data, for example, within Elections Canada, or or within political parties, or, do you have the ability to basically give us the capacity to deal with it?
Well, if you like to interpret my mandate letter as being responsible for democratic institutions and the integrity of the system, I think that those are things that we need to be mindful of and keep in consideration as we move forward. But I would certainly welcome the committee's perspectives on those, and how we move forward. I mean, it's so important that Canadians have confidence in the system, so that they know that when an election happens, that they can trust the results and continue to move forward with it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister and officials, for coming. We'll suspend and go in camera for committee business for 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Minister.